Welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining us today because we're tackling a highly requested and, let's be honest, kind of notorious topic. We are going to decode the matrix structure. If you've ever looked at a corporate org chart and felt like you needed a map, a compass, and maybe a translation guide just to figure it out, you are exactly in the right place. We're going to break down how these intricate organizational designs actually work, why on earth companies use them, and the hidden traps you really need to watch out for. So let's just jump right in. I want you to imagine a workplace where your traditional vertical chains of command, that classic top-down hierarchy we're all super used to, are just completely redefined. What actually happens when you take entirely different organizational structures and force them to work side by side, literally in tandem? Sounds like a recipe for chaos, right? But as we're going to see, when it's done right, it's an absolutely powerful way to run a business. Okay, let's dive into exactly what this is. A matrix structure is, at its core, a combination of structures. We're usually talking about mixing product and geographical divisions, or maybe functional and divisional structures, but having them operate at the exact same time. So instead of just sitting in, say, the marketing department, you might be in marketing, but simultaneously assigned to the European product launch division. You're literally existing in two structural dimensions at once. Wild, right? Looking at the design itself, we can brilliantly see what this looks like in practice. Notice how these cross-matrix relationships create a literal grid. It totally replaces your standard formal vertical lines of authority with horizontal and vertical intersections. You've got functions like operations, sales, finance, HR running across the top, and they intersect directly with project managers running down the side. It's really more of a web of collaboration rather than a single corporate ladder. Moving on to Section 1, the dream. Advantages of integration. So why on earth are organizations drawn to such a complex setup? Well, on paper, the advantages are absolutely massive. First off, it's fantastic for effective knowledge management. A matrix allows totally separate areas of knowledge to be integrated right across organizational boundaries. It's also highly flexible, mixing different dimensions together, which directly permits innovation. Plus, firms can use their resources way more efficiently. And for the employees, it provides professionals with a much broader range of responsibilities. It is a highly, highly dynamic environment. What's really fascinating here is how this plays out specifically for professional service organizations. For them, a matrix is uniquely helpful. It lets them take very particular knowledge specialisms, say a highly specific type of financial consulting or a niche engineering expertise, and apply it seamlessly to entirely different market or geographical segments. The expertise isn't just locked away in a silo, it flows right to where it's needed most. Next up, Section 2, Global Scale, Local Knowledge. Now, this ability to deploy expertise dynamically makes the matrix uniquely attractive to massive global organizations. And the crucial point here is understanding this exact contrast. Let's say you're running a global company. On one hand, you desperately need geographically defined divisions for local marketing. Why? Because you absolutely need that specialist local knowledge of the customers in that specific region. But at the exact same time, you still want global product divisions. You need worldwide coordination of product development and manufacturing to take advantage of economies of scale and specialization. The matrix is kind of the only structure that lets a company have its cake and eat it too, mixing that local dimension with the global dimension perfectly. But hey, nothing's perfect, right? So we really have to ask the critical question here. What actually happens when those formal, traditional lines of authority are completely replaced with these cross-matrix relationships? Like, what happens when the dream we just talked about smacks right into the hard reality of daily operations? Which brings us to Section 3, the reality, hidden problems. Tearing down traditional hierarchies naturally introduces some inherent friction. Just put yourself in the shoes of an employee in this system. Suddenly, you find yourself responsible to managers from two completely different structural dimensions. Imagine the everyday conflict of having to report to two different bosses simultaneously. Your functional manager wants one thing, but your project manager urgently needs another. Who are you going to prioritize? This kind of structural ambiguity is just a breeding ground for stress and conflict. And you better believe that conflict cascades upward. Because authority is shared, it typically takes way longer to reach decisions. Everything turns into this intense bargaining match between the managers of the different dimensions. This leads straight to the staff conflict we just mentioned, and ultimately it makes matrix organizations notoriously hard to control. The very flexibility we were just praising a few minutes ago, yeah, that can quickly devolve into a huge bureaucratic tug-of-war. And this builds into a really fascinating paradox. There can actually be an excessive reliance on group processes and teamwork. Now, teamwork sounds great, right? We all love teamwork. But in a matrix, over-relying on group consensus can actually erode timely decision-making. When literally everyone has to agree across multiple dimensions, the company can become totally paralyzed, unable to act quickly in a fast-moving market. Moving on to our final section, the bridge, the key to success. So if the matrix is packed with this much difficult friction, how do companies actually make it work? Well, the critical issue in practice is the way it actually functions day to day, meaning the human processes and relationships. Those formal lines on the organizational chart, that cool grid we looked at earlier, they actually matter far less than the interpersonal relationships that are driving them. Which brings us to the ultimate solution. The key ingredient in a successful matrix structure isn't some shiny new software system or a better drawn chart. It relies heavily on senior managers and their ability to sustain collaborative relationships across the matrix. The success of this whole complex structure rests squarely on the shoulders of leaders who are just exceptionally skilled at collaboration and communication. I want to leave you with this final thought regarding what those senior managers must be uniquely good at: coping with the messiness and ambiguity which that can bring. True matrix management isn't about eliminating the chaos, it's about mastering it. It requires a massive tolerance for ambiguity and a relentless focus on collaboration. So, the next time you look at a complex organization, ask yourself, do they just have the structure on paper, or do they actually have the collaborative leaders required to tame the messiness? We're unpacking a really fascinating architectural model for global businesses, the transnational organizational structure. If you've ever wondered how massive international companies manage to operate seamlessly across borders while somehow still catering perfectly to your specific local market, well, you're in exactly the right place. We're going to see how it bridges that incredibly complex gap between global coordination and local responsiveness. Okay, here's our quick roadmap for today. Section 1, the global business dilemma. Section 2, defining transnational structure. Section 3, the Unilever example. Section 4, 4 key managerial roles. And wrapping up with Section 5, challenges and disadvantages. Let's get to it. Section 1, the global business dilemma. Right, so to fully appreciate the transnational solution, we really have to grasp the initial problem. Historically, international business strategy felt like pitting two absolute extremes against each other. On one side, you've got the global strategy. This is typically supported by global product divisions, driven entirely by massive scale and global coordination. But on the other side, you've got the multi-domestic strategy. Here, local subsidiaries get a huge deal of autonomy to handle their own design, manufacturing, and marketing. So you're faced with this massive puzzle. Do you centralize for global scale, or do you decentralize so locals have total autonomy? For the longest time, companies felt they literally just had to choose one or the other. Moving on to Section 2, defining transnational structure. So, what if a company just refuses to compromise? That's exactly what a transnational structure does. It's an organizational model that seeks to grab the absolute best pieces from those two extreme strategies we just looked at. It blends the high local responsiveness of an international subsidiary with those massive coordination advantages you'd find in a global product company. Essentially, it wants to do both simultaneously. Now, while it does operate a lot like a standard matrix organization, the transnational model has two very specific defining features. First up, it responds specifically to the challenge of internationalization. And second, it actually tends to have more fixed responsibilities within its cross-cutting dimensions. Basically, it sets up this huge global network where each national unit operates entirely independently, but, and this is the real game changer, it also serves as a crucial source of ideas and capabilities for the entire corporation. Section 3. The Unilever example. I know, organizational theory can feel a little abstract sometimes, right? So how does a transnational structure actually operate out there in the wild? Like, how does a company actually manage that daily tension between a corporate center and independent units to balance global scale with local relevance?
To put that into perspective, let's look at Unilever. They don't just sit in a generic headquarters dictating everything. Instead, their worldwide center for hair care innovation is located specifically in France. On top of that, national units achieve greater scale economies by specializing on behalf of large regions. So, for example, Unilever replaced its web of tiny, scattered national food manufacturing units with a few highly specialized, much larger factories that then export across all of Europe. And to keep this giant, complex network connected, the corporate center established a system of forums, quite literally bringing managers together internationally just to swap experiences and coordinate their needs. It's a brilliant way to make the network hum.
Section 4. 4 key managerial roles.
Okay, so pulling off this balancing act, achieving global competence, local responsiveness, and organization-wide learning all at once, requires absolute clarity regarding boundaries and relationships. To see how it works, we have to look at 4 distinct types of managers. First up, the global business managers. Their overriding responsibility is pushing the company's global competitiveness across both national and functional boundaries. Think of them as the architects of business resources. They're your product and market strategists, driving product innovation and coordinating all those complex transnational transactions.
Next, we have the country or area managers. These folks have a fascinating dual responsibility. First off, they're the crucial local sensors. They pick up on local needs and feed that vital intelligence back to the international product developers. But secondly, and this is key, they don't just execute orders from the top. They actively seek to build unique competencies, aiming to turn their specific region into a center of excellence. Maybe that's in manufacturing or R&D, but it makes them a massive contributor to the company as a whole. Then you've got the functional managers. These are your leaders in specialized areas like finance or IT. They carry a major responsibility for ensuring worldwide innovation and learning actually happens across the various parts of the organization. To pull that off, they're constantly scanning the organization, recognizing best practices, cross-pollinating those ideas, and really acting as the global champions of innovation. Finally, tying the whole shebang together, we have the corporate or head office managers. You can think of them as the ultimate integrators. They aren't just leaders, they are the talent spotters among all those business, country, and functional managers. Their primary job is to facilitate the interplay between everyone we just talked about. They foster the actual processes of innovation and knowledge creation, making sure a rock-solid management center exists so that all the moving parts of the transnational structure work in absolute harmony. Section 5. Challenges and disadvantages. Now, it's not all smooth sailing. Balancing all these dynamic roles is incredibly difficult, and the structure itself can experience serious stress. Frankly, a transnational organization is extremely demanding on human capital. Because responsibilities are so incredibly diffuse across those 4 types of managers we just covered, keeping the entire organization aligned is intensely complex. And because it operates so similarly to a matrix, it unfortunately inherits many of the exact same control problems you'd find in a standard matrix organization. Which brings us to a really powerful quote from the source material regarding these disadvantages. It is very demanding of managers in terms of willingness to work not just at their immediate responsibilities, but for the good of the transnational as a whole. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. Imagine being dropped into this highly complex matrix. Would you have the vision, and honestly the discipline, to sacrifice your immediate local agenda for the global good? That's the real test of a transnational structure.
We're going to completely dissect a really fascinating modern organizational design. We're looking at a structure that doesn't just tolerate constant change, it literally thrives on it using temporary alliances. If you've ever wondered how some organizations pull off these incredibly complex, monumental tasks and then just seemingly vanish into thin air, well, you're absolutely in the right place. Let's get into it.
So let's kick things off with a pretty practical question. Think about how organizations manage to pull off massive, temporary challenges. Like, how do you organize the thousands of people needed for a blockbuster movie set, or the sprawling, insane infrastructure of a global sporting event like the Olympics? You know, traditional, rigid corporate structures with their permanent departments and endless chains of command, they just can't support that kind of rapid scaling. They're way too slow, too heavy, and frankly too permanent for a goal that has a strict expiration date. And that brings us to the core concept here. A project-based structure is an organizational design where teams are created to undertake specific work, and, here's the kicker, they're then dissolved. The defining characteristic of this whole setup is its intentional lack of permanence. It is quite literally built to end. Unlike your standard HR or accounting department that exists for the lifespan of the company, These project teams are born with a clear finish line right in their sights.
Now, this approach is super effective, but in very specific scenarios. It's typically used when an organization needs to deliver massive, incredibly expensive goods or services. Think civil engineering, right? Building a huge suspension bridge, or developing a complex IT system, or shooting a feature film. It's also the absolute go-to for time-limited events. When you've got a major conference, a massive sporting event, or a focused consulting gig, the project-based structure is really the only logical way to rally resources quickly and actually get the job done.
So what does this look like day to day?
Well, the organization essentially becomes a constantly changing, fluid collection of project teams. It's a real shapeshifter. The folks doing the actual ground-level work are operating in these temporary pods, but they aren't totally isolated. They're steered and kind of loosely glued together by a small corporate group at the center. This core group provides the high-level direction, while the project teams are given the autonomy to just go out and execute their specific missions.
And hey, it's worth noting you don't have to be a Hollywood studio or a mega construction firm to use this. Actually, a lot of traditional, everyday organizations use these teams in a more ad hoc way to just kind of complement their main structure. Say they need to push a new strategic initiative. If the regular, rigid hierarchy is just dragging its feet and proving ineffective, leadership will inject a temporary task force to provide that much-needed momentum and hyperfocus. It's like a strategic jolt to the system.
All right, moving on to Section 1, the highs. Let's look at the advantages of project-based structures.
There are some seriously compelling reasons why leaders love this model. And interestingly, accountability and control are actually really strong here. You'd think a temporary team would just be total chaos, right? But it's actually the opposite. The structure is incredibly flexible. Teams pop up and dissolve exactly as needed. But because every single team has a crystal clear task and a strict deadline before they disband, accountability is baked right in. Everyone knows exactly what their job is and exactly when they need to drop the mic.
Another huge win here is effective knowledge exchange. Look, in a standard corporate setup, it's practically a miracle if marketing ever talks to engineering, right? Everyone's in their own little silo. But in a project-based structure, team members are pulled from entirely different departments to tackle one unified goal. By bringing all these different folks together into one pod, organizations create this amazing organic environment for cross-pollination. Knowledge gets shared in ways that normally just wouldn't happen.
On top of that, these projects are uniquely great at drawing international talent. Because the lifespans of these teams are short and super well-defined, people are way more willing to travel and work temporarily across the globe. I mean, asking an expert to permanently uproot their life and move to another country, that's a massive hurdle. But asking them to fly out for a highly focused 6-month sprint, that's a much easier sell. It lets organizations grab the absolute best global talent for whatever specific challenge they're facing.
But we have to look at the flip side. Section 2, the lows, disadvantages and strategic risks.
So, while we can praise the agility all day, this level of fluidity brings some very real strategic risks. First off, without strong, overarching program management to keep things in check, organizations are super prone to spawning way too many projects in a totally uncoordinated way. You end up with all these rogue teams duplicating work or running in entirely opposite directions. Secondly, and this is a big one for the long term, constantly breaking up these teams can severely hinder the accumulation of specialized knowledge. Basically, right as a team hits its peak groove and deepens its expertise, the project ends, the team dissolves, and all that collective brilliance just scatters to the wind.
Yet, despite these very real documented downsides, the risk of total chaos and losing that long-term institutional memory, this style of organizing is undeniably growing in importance. Why? It all boils down to one absolute game changer: its unmatched inherent flexibility. In today's business landscape, the sheer ability to pivot often completely outweighs the need to hold on to long-term institutional memory.
We are operating in a ridiculously fast-moving world. An organization's survival literally depends on how fast it can react. In an environment like this, individual knowledge and specific competences have to be redeployed and integrated super fast, and often in completely novel ways. The project-based structure, flaws them all, is vital for this. It essentially lets a company disassemble and reassemble its human capital, kind of like Lego bricks, to instantly meet whatever crazy new challenge the market throws its way.
Which brings us to a really crucial final question to think about regarding the organizations around us today. Is your organization actually flexible enough to instantly redeploy its knowledge?
Like, can it break down those stubborn silos, form a temporary alliance of experts, execute a massive, complex challenge, and then seamlessly dissolve to get ready for the next one? Because in a fast-moving world, mastering the project-based structure might just be the ultimate survival trait. Thanks so much for joining me for